The opening of the community clinic marked a new chapter in Amelia and Daniel's lives, one filled with purpose and fulfillment. Yet with every success came new trials, and the world around them was far from ready to accept their love as easily as they had embraced it. The business elite still whispered behind Daniel's back, claiming Amelia was a distraction that cost him his edge. At the hospital, Amelia's colleagues began treating her differently, some with admiration, others with envy. She had thought the clinic would silence the critics, but instead, it seemed to spark a deeper resentment. And though their love grew stronger, the shadows of judgment never truly left them. Daniel, meanwhile, faced an escalating crisis in his empire. Rivals who had long envied his dominance saw an opportunity to strike. Rumors of corruption spread through the media, many planted by those who sought his downfall. Stock prices wavered, and once loyal partners began to withdraw their support. The board of directors, restless and frustrated, blamed Amelia, insisting Daniel had lost focus ever since she entered his life. At first, he dismissed their accusations, but the relentless pressure began to chip away at him. For the first time since his collapse at the Gala, Daniel felt the walls of power closing in on him again. One evening, Daniel returned home exhausted, his eyes shadowed with defeat. Amelia greeted him with warmth, but he barely touched his dinner. He confessed in a strained voice, "They want me to choose, between you and the company." The words stung Amelia like knives, though she tried to mask her hurt. "And what do you want?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Daniel's silence said more than words ever could. He loved her deeply, but his empire was more than wealth. It was the foundation of thousands of jobs, the legacy he had built from nothing. He was torn between love and duty, and the choice threatened to shatter them both. Amelia's heart ached, but she didn't let her pain show. Instead, she placed her hand on his and whispered, "Then don't choose for me. Choose for yourself. But remember, if you lose yourself to keep them happy, what do you really have left?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes glistening, but no answer came. That night, Amelia cried silently into her pillow, fearing the man she had saved would eventually walk away to protect what the world demanded of him. She wondered if love was truly enough to bridge a chasm so wide, or if perhaps she had been naive to believe it could be. The following weeks grew heavier. Daniel was pulled into endless meetings, fighting to maintain control of his company while keeping the board from ousting him. Amelia saw less of him, their moments together reduced to fleeting phone calls or tired exchanges late at night. Yet through the distance, her love didn't waver. She threw herself into her work at the clinic, determined to honor her mother's memory and the promise she and Daniel had made. But in quiet moments, loneliness crept in, and doubts whispered that maybe the world had been right, maybe she didn't belong by his side after all. One fateful day, the rumors escalated into a scandal. An anonymous source leaked documents suggesting Daniel had manipulated markets for personal gain years earlier, threatening not just his reputation but his freedom. Though Daniel insisted the claims were false, the media swarmed, investors panicked, and prosecutors began circling. The man once untouchable was now painted as a criminal, and Amelia was dragged into the storm. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, hurling cruel questions about whether she was complicit or just a pawn. At the hospital, whispers grew louder, and patients questioned her integrity. Amelia felt her world crumbling, but her faith in Daniel remained unshaken. Daniel, however, began to pull away. He feared the scandal would destroy Amelia's life, and he couldn't bear to see her suffer for his sake. One evening, after days of silence, he came to her apartment with an expression she had never seen before, one of finality. "Amelia," he began, his voice breaking, "I need to protect you. The only way I can do that is if we're not together." Her heart shattered instantly, the words slicing through her like glass. She pleaded with him, reminding him of their promise, of everything they had endured. But Daniel, consumed by guilt and fear, kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you too much to let you burn with me." The days that followed were some of the darkest of Amelia's life. She threw herself into the clinic, burying her heartbreak under long hours and endless patience. At night, she lay awake, clutching the memory of his touch, wondering if she had lost him forever. The press feasted on their breakup, spinning it as proof she had only been with him for status. Yet Amelia never once spoke against him. Deep inside, she knew his love had been real, even if fear had driven him away. And though her heart ached with every passing day, she refused to let despair define her. Meanwhile, Daniel fought his battles alone. He refused to drag Amelia further into the chaos, believing distance was the only way to shield her. But every night, he found himself staring at his phone, tempted to call her, to hear her voice, to feel the comfort only she could bring. He missed her laughter, her strength, the way she had seen him as more than a billionaire. The empire that had once been his pride now felt like a cage, and for the first time, he questioned whether it was worth the cost of losing the only person who had ever truly loved him. Regret gnawed at him, but pride kept him silent. The scandal eventually reached a boiling point when Daniel was summoned for an official investigation. It seemed the world was ready to watch him fall, to strip him of everything he had built. Amelia watched from a distance, her heart breaking as headlines painted him as a villain. She wanted to run to him, to stand by his side, but his silence had built a wall she couldn't cross. Yet fate has a way of shattering walls, and one evening, as Amelia left the clinic, she found Daniel waiting outside. He looked thinner, older, his eyes weary but filled with the same love she had always known. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was just losing myself." Amelia's tears flowed freely as she stepped into his arms, her heart torn between relief and fear. "Then don't leave again," she whispered fiercely. Daniel held her as if letting go would mean losing everything. In that embrace, the weight of pride, fear, and doubt melted away, leaving only the truth: they were stronger together than apart. But as much as their love reignited, the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever. Daniel's trial approached, and the outcome could determine not just his empire's fate, but their future. Amelia knew the path forward would test them in ways neither had faced before, but this time, she was ready to fight with him, not from the sidelines. The trial became a spectacle, the courtroom packed with reporters and cameras broadcasting every detail. Daniel stood accused of crimes he hadn't committed, yet the evidence stacked against him was damning. Amelia sat in the gallery, her heart pounding with every word, refusing to look away. She saw the toll it took on him, the weight of betrayal by those he had once trusted. Yet she also saw his strength, the quiet dignity with which he faced his accusers. When the defense faltered, Amelia stepped forward with her own testimony, speaking not as a nurse or a partner, but as the woman who had seen Daniel at his weakest and knew his heart better than anyone. Her words pierced through the noise of lies and speculation. She spoke of the man who funded a community clinic not for headlines, but for compassion. The man who nearly lost his life, only to emerge more human, more selfless than ever before. Her voice trembled with emotion, but her conviction was unshakable. For the first time, the world saw Daniel not as a billionaire or a scandal, but as a man whose flaws were outweighed by his humanity. The courtroom fell silent, the air heavy with truth. And in that silence, Daniel realized that Amelia had once again saved him, not with her hands, but with her heart. When the verdict finally came, the tension was unbearable. The judge declared Daniel not guilty, citing insufficient evidence and exposing the rival schemes behind the accusations. Relief swept through the courtroom, applause breaking out as Daniel embraced his attorneys. But it was Amelia he turned to first, crossing the room to hold her in his arms. Cameras flashed wildly, but neither of them cared. In that moment, the empire, the scandal, the whispers, all of it faded into the background. What remained was love, tested by fire but unbroken, stronger than either of them had ever imagined. The weeks after the trial were filled with rebuilding, not just of Daniel's reputation, but of their lives together. Rivals who had once sought his downfall now feared the resilience that had carried him through. Investors returned cautiously, and the board, once skeptical, now respected his vision more than ever. Yet Daniel no longer cared about restoring his empire to its former glory. His focus was on building a legacy that mattered, one rooted in the values Amelia had awakened in him. Together, they expanded the clinic into a network of community health centers, blending his resources with her compassion to create lasting change. Amelia, though still haunted by the scars of gossip and judgment, found peace in the purpose she shared with Daniel. She knew the world would always talk, but she no longer cared. She had seen love withstand trials, heartbreak, and betrayal, and it had emerged stronger each time. She stood beside Daniel not as a symbol of controversy, but as his equal, his partner, his anchor. And as they walked hand in hand into a future filled with uncertainty, they carried with them a truth that no scandal or rumor could erase, that love, when rooted in courage and compassion, could outlast even the harshest storms. The chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, their golden light casting an almost dreamlike glow on the wealthy elite gathered for the annual charity gala. Laughter echoed against marble walls, champagne glasses clinked, and a live orchestra played softly in the background. Everyone was dressed to perfection, women in glittering gowns and men in tuxedos tailored to flawlessness. Among them stood Daniel Hargrave, one of the country's youngest billionaires, admired for his sharp mind and feared for his ruthless business strategies. Yet tonight, as he raised a glass to toast his newest philanthropic project, his eyes carried a heaviness that no one seemed to notice. He forced a smile, hiding the storm within, but fate had something planned that would soon expose his vulnerability to the world. Emilia Torres moved quietly between tables, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres and glasses with practiced precision. She had been working as a waitress for over 3 years, juggling night shifts with nursing school during the day. Tonight's event wasn't just another shift, it was an opportunity to make enough in tips to cover her mother's medical prescription for the month. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her steps quick but careful as she tried not to draw attention. The gala's glittering crowd barely noticed her, except when reaching for food or wine. To them, she was invisible, a background figure in their world of excess. But Emilia observed everything, faces, gestures, the loneliness behind certain smiles. She often wondered how people so wealthy could look so empty. As the evening carried on, Daniel rose to the stage for his speech. The crowd quieted, eager to hear words from the man who had turned industries upside down. He spoke of progress, of innovation, and of hope, but midway, his voice faltered. He pressed a hand to his chest, his complexion paling. At first, people assumed it was a dramatic pause. Then, to the shock of everyone present, Daniel stumbled and collapsed onto the stage. Gasps filled the room, screams followed, and the orchestra fell silent in abrupt horror. Guests stood frozen, unsure of what to do, their world of control suddenly shaken by something beyond wealth and power. Emilia's eyes widened as she dropped her tray and rushed forward instinctively, her heart pounding louder than the chaos around her. People backed away, forming a circle of fear around the fallen billionaire. Some pulled out their phones to call for help, others hesitated, not wanting to get involved. Emilia, however, fell to her knees beside Daniel, her hands steady despite the rush of adrenaline. She recognized the signs, his breathing shallow, lips faintly blue, pulse erratic. Training from her nursing classes clicked into place. She checked his airway, her voice firm as she called out for someone to bring water and clear the area. "Give him space," she demanded, her authority surprising those who had moments ago seen her as just a server. She tilted Daniel's head back, beginning CPR compressions without hesitation. The crowd held its breath, watching as a waitress fought to keep a billionaire alive. Emilia's arms burned with effort as she counted compressions, each push fueled by determination. Sweat dotted her forehead, her black uniform damp against her skin, but she refused to stop. Memories of her mother's health struggles flooded her mind, how powerless she had once felt when doctors were slow to respond. She swore she would never freeze when life was at stake. Daniel's chest rose faintly under her care, but his pulse was still dangerously weak. Guests whispered, some crying, others still paralyzed with disbelief. Emilia shouted again, "Call an ambulance, now." Finally, someone moved, fumbling for their phone too. "Dial emergency services." Her voice didn't shake, she was calm, resolute, the opposite of the panic swirling around her. For what felt like hours but was only minutes, Emilia worked tirelessly, alternating between compressions and rescue breaths. Her mind stayed laser-focused, shutting out the weight of the moment and the prestige of the man she was trying to save. Then, with one last push, Daniel gasped, a ragged sound that cut through the silence like thunder. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. Relief washed over Emilia as tears blurred her vision, but she held his hand firmly, reassuring him that he wasn't alone. Applause erupted around them, hesitant at first, then thunderous, as if the crowd had witnessed a miracle. The billionaire, who moments ago seemed untouchable yet fragile, now looked at the waitress with something close to awe. Paramedics arrived quickly, taking over with professional swiftness. Emilia stepped back, her chest heaving, arms trembling from exhaustion. She suddenly became aware of the crowd's stares, admiration mixed with guilt for having done nothing themselves. Daniel, strapped onto a stretcher, refused to let go of Amelia's hand until the last possible moment. His lips parted, weak but deliberate. "Stay." She froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly, until his eyes locked onto hers with unmistakable intent. In that instant, she realized she had crossed an invisible line between two worlds, the one of glittering wealth and the one of survival. And yet, she had done nothing more than follow her heart and her training. The following days brought a media frenzy. Headlines blared with the story of the billionaire who had collapsed at the gala and the courageous waitress who saved his life. Cameras camped outside Amelia's small apartment, reporters clamoring for her story. She avoided them all, unwilling to turn her actions into a spectacle. To her, it wasn't heroism, it was simply what anyone should do. But deep down, she knew not everyone would have acted the same. She returned to work quietly, trying to blend back into the background, though whispers followed her everywhere she went. Patrons looked at her differently now, not just as a server, but as the woman who defied fear. Meanwhile, Daniel recovered in a private hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses who marveled at the story. Yet it wasn't their care he thought about, it was Amelia. He remembered the strength in her eyes, the steadiness of her hands, and the voice that demanded space when everyone else hesitated. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, human, stripped of the armor of wealth and power. He realized he owed not just his life, but his perspective to her. The board of his company urged him to rest, but Daniel insisted on finding the waitress who had saved him. Not because of gratitude alone, but because something deeper stirred within him, a longing he hadn't felt in a lifetime. Amelia resisted when an invitation arrived, handwritten and sealed, asking her to meet Daniel once he was discharged. She didn't want to be paraded as some symbol or pitied with money. But curiosity tugged at her heart, and a quiet voice inside urged her to see him, not as a billionaire, but as a man she had kept alive. When she arrived at his residence, she was struck not by the grandeur of his mansion but by the stillness in his eyes when they met hers again. He looked at her as if she was the only person in the world who had seen him without the veil of power. The conversation began with thanks, but quickly unraveled into stories, about her struggles, her studies, her mother's health, and his loneliness despite riches. Days turned into weeks as Daniel found excuses to see her again, sometimes under the pretense of charity meetings. Sometimes just to share coffee. Amelia remained cautious, wary of being drawn into a world that had no place for someone like her. Yet, his sincerity chipped away at her doubts. He admired her determination, her refusal to be dazzled by wealth, and the compassion that guided her every decision. For Amelia, she saw not a billionaire, but a man humbled by mortality, searching for meaning beyond numbers and deals. Slowly, an unlikely bond formed between them, rooted not in status but in the shared moment where life and death balanced on the edge of her hands. But the world didn't remain silent. Gossip spread in tabloids, painting Amelia as a gold digger, a waitress who had, strategically, saved Daniel to climb into wealth. Strangers harassed her online, while some coworkers distanced themselves out of jealousy. Amelia's heart ached, not for herself, but for the way truth was twisted into something cruel. She considered walking away, retreating into the shadows where her life had been simple, if difficult. Daniel, however, refused to let her bear the weight alone. He went public with a statement, not of defense, but of admiration, calling Amelia not only his savior but his inspiration. His words silenced critics and forced the world to see her strength. Even with his support, Amelia battled doubts. Could someone from her world truly belong in his? Late nights in her small apartment, she wrestled with fears of being consumed by a life she never wanted. But each time she remembered his hand in hers, the gratitude in his eyes, the quiet moments where he listened without judgment, her heart softened. Daniel, too, struggled with the expectations of his circle, who warned him against distractions. Yet he had already decided, life was too fragile, too fleeting, to waste on appearances. The night he nearly died had stripped him bare, and Amelia was the one who brought him back. To him, she wasn't a distraction, she was his second chance. Their journey was far from easy, marked by whispers, challenges, and the clash of two worlds. But as Amelia finally graduated nursing school, with Daniel seated proudly in the front row, she realized something profound. It wasn't wealth or recognition that defined her path. It was the courage to act when others froze, to love when fear said otherwise, and to believe that even the smallest actions could change the course of lives. Daniel, once a symbol of unreachable success, found his greatest treasure not in empires or profits, but in the quiet strength of a woman who had seen him at his weakest and stayed. Together, they built not just a partnership, but a reminder that humanity, above all, was the wealth no one could measure. The months following Amelia's graduation brought new beginnings neither she nor Daniel could have predicted. She officially became a registered nurse, securing a position at a city hospital where her skills were put to the test daily. The work was grueling, the shifts exhausting, yet every time she looked into the eyes of patients whose lives depended on her, she felt a profound sense of purpose. At the same time, Daniel threw himself into philanthropic projects, inspired by her humility and resilience. He shifted from building empires to building initiatives that funded medical care for underprivileged families. But as much as they grew together, the outside world wasn't done challenging them. The scrutiny intensified as gossip magazines continued to spin stories, painting Amelia as the waitress turned nurse who snagged the billionaire's heart. Some claimed she had no real feelings for Daniel, only ambition. Others criticized Daniel for lowering himself by choosing someone from outside his elite circle. Every headline stung, and though Amelia tried to ignore them, the whispers at the hospital, the stares on the streets, made her question whether love was strong enough to withstand such cruelty. Daniel reassured her with every word and gesture, but deep inside, Amelia carried the fear of being the reason his reputation suffered. Their relationship faced its first real test when Daniel invited Amelia to attend a prestigious business conference as his guest. It was a chance for her to stand by his side, to be recognized as more than just the woman who saved his life. But when she walked into the towering hall, surrounded by the world's most powerful men and women, she felt every eye pierce through her. Conversations faltered, glances turned into whispers, and even Daniel's closest colleagues offered cold, dismissive smiles. Amelia's confidence cracked beneath the weight of judgment. She forced herself to remain poised, but that night, alone in Daniel's car, she whispered the words she had feared for months, "Maybe I don't belong in your world." Daniel's heart broke at her confession. He reached for her hand, his voice raw with emotion. "Amelia, you don't belong in my world, you are my world. Don't let them convince you otherwise." But no matter how much he meant it, Amelia still carried doubt. She loved him deeply, yet she questioned whether love was enough to bridge the vast gulf between them. That night, she lay awake replaying the humiliation of the evening, wondering if walking away would free him from the burden she believed she had become. Her heart ached with the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own battles. The board of his company grew restless, worried that his shift toward philanthropy and his public devotion to Amelia weakened his sharp edge. Investors questioned his judgment, fearing he had grown too soft. Rumors spread that his empire could crumble if he didn't return to his old ways. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the pull of two opposing forces, his duty to the empire he built and his longing for a life filled with meaning, one Amelia had awakened in him. The pressure mounted, and though he rarely showed it, sleepless nights and private doubts began to take their toll. Amelia noticed the changes in him. His smiles were thinner, his silences longer, and though he never complained, she could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. One evening, after a long shift at the hospital, she found him sitting on her apartment floor, jacket discarded, tie loosened, staring blankly at the wall. He admitted in a voice so fragile it startled her, "I don't know if I can hold it all together." In that moment, she realized their love wasn't just about her fears, it was about his too. The billionaire the world saw as unshakable was just a man, weary and longing for someone to remind him that it was okay to let go. Amelia knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "You don't have to hold it all alone," she whispered. Tears stung Daniel's eyes, though he quickly tried to hide them. For years he had built walls so high no one could climb them, yet Amelia had dismantled them one by one with compassion and patience. She didn't see him as a billionaire or a figure of power, she saw him as Daniel, the man whose life she had once saved, and who now saved hers in ways words couldn't capture. That night, they made a silent promise to each other: no matter how hard the world tried to tear them apart, they would fight together. The promise, however, was soon tested when tragedy struck closer than either expected. Amelia's mother, whose health had always been fragile, suffered a sudden complication that left her in critical condition. Amelia rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding with terror as machines beeped and doctors hurried. She sat by her mother's side, holding her frail hand, tears falling freely as she begged her to stay. Daniel arrived within the hour, canceling meetings and ignoring calls, staying by Amelia's side through sleepless nights. In those moments, he didn't care about the empire, the board, or the gossip, only about the woman he loved and the mother who had raised her. Despite the best efforts of doctors, Amelia's mother's condition worsened. One night, as Amelia dozed off in a chair, Daniel overheard her mother whisper faintly, "Take care of her, she's stronger than she knows, but she needs someone who believes in her." Daniel squeezed her hand, his heart aching with the weight of her words. When Amelia awoke and found her mother slipping away, she broke into sobs that shook her body. Daniel held her, shielding her from the world, even as grief tore through them both. In the days that followed, Amelia felt like a piece of her had been ripped away, and Daniel feared she might retreat from him entirely. The funeral was quiet, attended by only close friends and neighbors. Amelia stood at the graveside, staring at the earth that now separated her from the woman who had been her anchor. She felt empty, broken, and unsure of how to move forward. Daniel remained close, offering silent strength, yet he knew this was a journey she had to walk herself. Still, he refused to leave her side. The press tried to intrude, hungry for pictures of a grieving Amelia, but Daniel shielded her from their cruelty with a ferocity that surprised even himself. For once, he didn't care about his image, only about her healing. In the weeks that followed, Amelia withdrew into herself, struggling to balance her grief with her responsibilities at the hospital. She buried herself in work, hoping that caring for others would ease the hollow ache inside. Daniel worried, watching her wear herself down, but he didn't push, he simply stayed, waiting for the day she would let him back in. And slowly, she did. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Amelia returned home to find Daniel waiting with a simple home-cooked meal. She broke down, not from sadness, but from the realization that even in her darkest moments, she wasn't alone. Their bond deepened after that, forged not just in moments of glamour but in the crucible of grief and resilience. They began to dream together, not of empires or riches, but of a life where purpose outweighed power. Amelia spoke of opening a small community clinic in honor of her mother, a place where no one would be turned away for lack of money. Daniel listened, his eyes shining with pride, and promised to fund every brick, not as charity but as a testament to the woman who had saved him. Twice, once with her hands, and once with her heart. For the first time, Amelia dared to believe their love could outlast the world's doubts. Yet the road ahead was far from smooth. Rivals in Daniel's industry grew bolder, circling like sharks at the scent of weakness, hoping to seize control of his empire. They spread rumors, staged hostile takeovers, and tried to undermine his vision of balancing profit with purpose. Daniel fought fiercely, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. Amelia stood by him, offering comfort when he stumbled, reminding him why he had chosen this path. And though the battle seemed endless, their shared purpose gave them strength. They were no longer just a billionaire and a waitress turned nurse, they were partners in a fight larger than themselves. As the community clinic finally opened its doors, a ribbon-cutting ceremony drew crowds from all walks of life. Amelia stood proudly at the entrance, wearing her nurse's uniform, tears in her eyes as she cut the ribbon alongside Daniel. Cameras flashed, but for once, the story wasn't twisted, it was celebrated. The headlines read of a billionaire and a nurse who turned tragedy into hope, who gave back not for fame, but for love. The building was more than brick and mortar, it was a promise fulfilled, a legacy born from compassion. And as Daniel slipped his hand into hers, Amelia realized that despite every challenge, every whisper, and every heartbreak, they had built something unshakable together.